Hi, everyone. Thank you. Welcome to our last panel of dialogues for Expo Chicago. I'm very excited to introduce Marilu Knode, who is the Executive Director of the Laumeier Sculpture Park, Hank Willis Thomas, artist, and Orly Genger, artist. We're talking about sculpture culture and what that means in today's contemporary art world. So I will let them take it away.
Thanks so much, Tricia, and everybody for being here today. I'm very honored to be speaking with Orly and Hank, whose work I admire very much. Sculpture culture, it's a very funny title, and I determined that really why it's appropriate is that we're really in the golden age of sculpture outdoor public art programs, and I think we'll talk a little bit about the distinction between sculpture parks and public art programs a little bit later. And for those of you who are maybe sort of new to the history of sculpture programs outdoors, certainly we're seeing in the last 5 years or so moving away from the 1% public program model, which is 1% of a building program's budget goes towards commissioning an artwork often slapped onto a building, slapped onto a public plaza, and I think the phrase plop art will be something that we have to live down for the rest of our lives, anybody dealing with public art. But we're going towards a more curated public program, and we see this across the country. And then both Hank and Orly will talk a little bit about some of the work that they've done outside in public. And of course, you know that both Hank and Orly have outdoor works in Chicago at the moment, and they'll be talking a little bit about those things. I want to just speak very briefly about how our work at Laumeier Sculpture Park has been about looking at landscape, whether that's the social, the cultural, or the political. And then this is one of the pieces that I think is really very funny. It's the Anthony Gormley project for the Fourth Plinth in 2009. And he had an opportunity to become an artist to do a piece on top of this Fourth Plinth in Trafalgar Square. And what he did instead was turn his opportunity over to all the residents of the UK. And you could get into a lottery and perhaps stand on top of this plinth and do some sort of performative activity. And I love this piece in particular because it looks as if this gentleman has taken very seriously the idea of public conversation, public dialogue, the old tradition in the UK of the town crier, but also sort of public announcements as a way to convey information. In fact, this guy was promoting his bar. And so when you turn things over to the public, you don't always get the things that you think you're going to get. I want to draw your attention to a couple of documents that have been very important in our thinking at Laumeier. Important is Erica Doss's book, Memorial Mania, Public Feeling in America. And I think one of the really very distinct things that has changed is the fact that the public expects to have a very different kind of dialogue with artists. And it's not just about, who are you, where do you live, but it's really about what's the ongoing relationship that you might have. I want to just, so in any case, the relationship between an artist and the public is built very differently. I want to talk a little bit about Laumeier's panel, our booth here, under the rubric New Territories, which is a new project that we've just launched. We're working with Rux Media Collective in New Delhi, and they've asked us to use this fair as an opportunity to ask you, the public, if the world is a fair place then. And so if you could please go by our booth after the conversation and sign up give us some feedback on that, and then you get actually a little present as well. So it's a good exchange. Orly is checking to see where we are. You know what, Hank, we could maybe just sit down and talk a little bit, you and I, while we're here.
Sure.
So, Hank, you've got some work out in the city of Chicago right now. Yeah. But you had said, we were talking earlier about what is actually public versus what's a sculpture garden, sculpture outside. And you don't believe in putting labels on your artwork. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, I guess what I'm interested in when I put work in the public is to let the work speak for itself. So much of the images and the text that we see or information that we receive in the public has a corporate brand on it, and it tells us in a certain way what to think and what to consume and how to relate to them. And I'm really interested in putting information out into the world and letting people figure out for themselves what they think about it, how they feel about it, and how to engage with it. And because I mean, it depends on the circumstance, but a lot of times even if it's a corporation that is promoting something, we actually don't know who is behind it. You know, and so I'm really interested in this idea of the anonymity, the power of anonymity, and the distribution of putting your voice and putting a statement into the public, and people, you know, having to contend with it, but not necessarily being able to point a finger at a specific person, because I think that often affects the way that people read what's being put out there. I'm interested in complicating these things. Okay. But so I'm Hank Willis Thomas. I'm an artist from New York. I'm mostly invested in things related to popular culture, photography, and history as it relates to race, gender, and in class, certainly. And, oops. So part of the benchmark projects that's currently up in the Bucktown Wicker Park area with Moniquemeloche Gallery. So thanks to Monique and to Allison Glenn, who are here, that curated this project, where we took different images of mine that I've created over the years and put them out into the public. And this is a neighborhood that is kind of on the cusp of gentrification and a lot of issues related to kind of how race and commerce plays into the public. And the work that I'm showing primarily here are issues dealing with hybridity, but also with exploitation and things related to sports, but also images that I've taken that are from ads. So the actual image is from a cigarette ad, and then the text is from another cigarette ad, but I've removed the cigarette from it. And it's rare that you see an image of an African-American male in the public that's just kind of looking directly at you in the statement of "it's more you" in this elegant way. I just love that, the power of that. But then there's also this piece, Black Power, where I took these grills and had Black Power encrusted in them, thinking about bling bling, that movement that really came out of youth culture, and thinking about how Lil Wayne, who was 16 at the time that he coined the term, really, you know, took that, he took power, and that this idea of using the bling as a way to assert your power and change kind of conversations about who can have and what it means to have, I thought was really fascinating. And this is a piece called From Can't See in the Morning to Can't See at Night, which I think is important to show in Chicago, because I was really thinking about, he's wearing an Ole Miss uniform in this picture, but I was thinking about college sports, and we know that the Northwestern football team petitioned to become unionized. And I think about college sports as problematic because it's a multi-billion-dollar industry fueled off of the free labor of descendants of slaves primarily, and the fact that many of them are working on the same fields that their ancestors actually, you know, worked on. And, you know, then merchandising being a major part of what sports is about, I think there's all of this irony in this backbreaking labor. But I'm also thinking, okay, if it's not slavery, maybe it's like sharecropping, where you're free, you just don't have, you know, everything all the wealth you create is mine. You can just stay here as long as you're useful. And that, what's really exciting about that is that the first time I started to use work, I like to think of advertising. Well, advertising is the most ubiquitous language in the world, and I think not enough of us, all of us can read it, but not enough of us use it. And I'm really interested in us using this language that, you know, you can speak in Korea, you can speak in Vietnam, you can speak in Cuba, and people can still understand it. And I'm interested. And so when I first started to do work using logos and ads to talk about issues, I put them out, and this is actually my MFA show. I put them outside of the MFA show without my name on it. And it was really funny because people, this is about 10 years ago, but people were walking into the show and they were like, I can't believe the school has gotten so corporate. They have Nike and Absolute sponsoring the MFA show. And I like the idea that, you know, people didn't know it was art, because sometimes when you say something's art, people automatically feel, oh, I can... It disarms them, but then when they walk into it, they're like, I don't know how I feel about this, you know. And then this just happens to be in Jamaica, Queens, and there's a Michael Vick Nike ad right behind it, which was kind of really fascinating to see that. And I started to think about advertising as this language because my cousin was murdered in Philadelphia. He was murdered his friends were wearing these diamond and platinum chains during that bling bling moment, and he wasn't actually wearing anything, but he was with them, and the killers made him lay face down in the snow and shot him in the back of the head, but they robbed the other guys for the necklaces. And we were in the funeral home, and there's this kind of weird moment where you're trying to choose between the $7,000 casket and the $5,000 casket and the $2,000 casket, and there's this unspoken thing that you couldn't afford to love them enough if you buy the $2,000 one, and you maybe loved him more if you could afford all the more expensive stuff. But either way, it was going to go on credit card. And it was this fact that even in mourning, you're still being marketed to. I struggled with, and that was a way of dealing with it. And so I put it out in public at the Yerba Buena Arts Center in San Francisco, and then I took it to Alabama I don't know what happened. Can we play that? Is that playing? This is at the Birmingham Museum of Art. No?
Janet, David,
and there was a different
and Rick,
response.
proud to be the most watched local newscasts in Alabama. Fox 6 News, the most powerful name in local news.
Fox 6 News reporter Melanie Posey takes a look at it. She joins us live from the museum tonight. Melanie?
Well, Janet and Devin, here is the picture that we're talking about. You can see the MasterCard logo and you see the MasterCard slogan, so you think it's a MasterCard ad, right? Wrong. What it is doing is creating a lot of dialogue, and those here at the museum say that is exactly what it was designed to do. The picture hangs boldly on the back of the Birmingham Museum of Art, an African-American family grieving at a funeral. The caption, a spinoff of the MasterCard advertising campaign. Three-piece suit, $250. Gold chain, $400. 9mm pistol, $79. Bullet, 60 cents. Picking the perfect casket for your son, priceless. To the unknowing eye, it brings a strong response.
Yeah, that's offensive to me too, because it seems like it's stereotypical that people are just tagging the black community with the things that we use, the things that we buy, things that we flaunt.
And I'm not black, but I would think that it would be offensive to black people.
I think when someone walks off the street, they're wondering, is it an ad? If not, why is it up here? What is it? What's the point? Why does MasterCard have their name on it?
This is not an ad. It's contemporary art on display at the Birmingham Museum of Art. The artist, a young black man by the name of Hank Willis Thomas. The picture taken at his own cousin's funeral after he was killed during a robbery.
He wanted to get at the grief his family was feeling and the frustration with this sort of cycle of violence that's sort of afflicting the country. I think he's using the term priceless here, not in a satiric way, but to suggest that life is the most priceless thing of all.
Willis relies on artistic license to play off of the MasterCard logo, a key he uses knowing how much Americans connect with advertising. After learning what it's all about, Jennifer Swenson's response turns from offense to grief and eventually hope.
I guess the artist had a choice. He could have picked up a gun and he could have sought revenge. And what this artist chose to do was to make a statement, even though it's offensive to some people, if it changed one person's thought process in life, then it would be worth it.
Now, because of the response to this picture, the museum has put up this explanation. However, as you can see, it is rather small in comparison to the picture. Some people may miss it, so they plan to add.
So you get the picture. And for me, it was just really, first of all, the work was really personal, right? And then I put in the public thinking that maybe there would be this empathy or this conversation within the African-American community about some of these issues, but members of the African-American community actually felt that it was an attack. And then the fact that it was art made it okay, and it was made by a young black man, so it couldn't be racist, and it was his cousin's funeral, so it couldn't be insensitive. As these ways it said a lot about who has the right to talk about what. But for me, it was the first time I realized that when you put the work out into the public, you can't control what people have, respond to it. And the fact that it had a MasterCard logo and not an alter MasterCard logo is part of what made people want to talk about it. If I just put it up there, it may not have been as engaging because we're used to seeing a logo as a key into a conversation. And so then I've shown work. This is actually a picture of Rashid Johnson and I that we put on billboards in Toronto for Toronto, Contact Toronto, and I've put work in public in various ways on billboards and signs, and it's sometimes, I'm waiting for the response and people just walk right by it. And I actually love that because that means that it's just working in the subconscious, that because we need to not see images. We need to just see images sometimes, and not just see images that are telling us. I see Carlos Javier Ortiz here, whose pictures I think I would love to see out here in Chicago in the public. So raise your hand so people can come talk to you. And I don't know what's happening, but I took all of these cigarette ads, and they were what I found fascinating about cigarette ads for the African American community is that they were the first places where we got to see. It's not going backwards. This is.
Can we
how do
make
we go
the slides go backwards, please?
The red one?
It's not working.
Yeah.
Right.
That's forward. Has anybody seen this before?
Yeah, there we go.
All right.
There you go. One more.
Well, forward one.
Forward one more.
All right, we're back. But really what's fascinating is like when we saw, and I'm just kind of stalling for Orly, but don't worry, I got the gift of gab, so it's fine. But what's interesting, when the cigarettes were marketed to white men, as we saw with the Marlboro ads, it's about being rugged and rough. But the same product marketed to black women, you're supposed to like wear silk, and wear your best of the best. And some of the first places that people got to see beautiful images of African Americans in public were in cigarette ads, and that's fascinating to me. About I can go and talk about it forever, but so when I remove the cigarettes from them, it starts to have a very different meaning, and so that's what some of the pieces out in the public are. And when I also thinking about the potency of the fist that was both for the unions and socialism, but also for Black Power. Thinking about kind of what Black Power means now, I created this sundial around 2006 called "It's About Time," and thinking about how people who are the generation after the civil rights generation have used their wealth as a political method. And so, in this idea of it being a sundial, and each there were actually plaques about different moments in time related to quote unquote Black wealth and progress that would, as the sun moved around, it would hit a different point in the fist. And this was at a sculpture park, Socrates Sculpture Park, during the time of the war between Hezbollah and Israel in 2006. Long story short, I wound up being in the middle of this conversation between Israeli and Palestinian, who were the only two people who could empathize with each other about what was going on, whereas the rest of us were kind of looking to see what was happening at this artist residency. And so I made this speech balloons, imagining star-crossed lovers on opposite sides of the wall that was built in Jerusalem around the time. One saying "the truth is I am you" in Hebrew, and one saying "the truth is I love you" in Arabic, but both yelling and neither of no understanding what the other person might be really trying to communicate. And so with this idea of the truth, I started to think about the truth as because I think this was the Bush era, and this idea of absolute truth and what's right and all these things. I started to make these poems that with a friend of mine named Ryan Alexiev. It says, this is at UCSF, but each of these say, like, this is Swahili, this is in Chinese. We translated this text into 25 different languages, saying, the truth is I know you, the truth is I hear you, this is the truth is I love you, and then you could figure out how to say it phonetically, probably poorly in Mandarin or Cantonese. And it's this idea of if you could learn how to say one thing in someone else's language, it would hopefully bridge this gap. And so we asked someone who signs, who was deaf, to sign "the truth is I hear you," which was, so it's a lenticular that changes as you walk past it. One of the things that was fascinating is when we asked him to do that, he was just like, we don't have a word for "hear." So he had to interpret hearing for us because it's irrelevant in that language. And the idea of translating the truth, which is something that is supposed to mean something in all these different languages, because sometimes we'd have people say, well, we can't say the truth is, but we can say the thing I know is, or the reality is, and then the you is dependent on what's the gender, what's the status, and so all of these things that I thought were very plain and easily to translate in English become much more complicated. And so I was really invested in trying to kind of broaden that conversation, and a lot of my work that deals with the public is about getting actually the public to participate in making the art. So my friend Ryan and another guy, Jim, who lives in Ireland, and I made this piece called The Truth Booth. And it's basically a modern-day confession booth. It's a touchscreen, and you walk in, and it says, everyone has their version of the truth. What's yours? Speak for the next 2 minutes, starting with the truth is. And we've taken it to Ireland, to Afghanistan. It traveled around Cleveland. It was in D.C. And, yeah, this is the touchscreen. So, and it's basically this kind of really is an opportunity for people to go in and to create the meaning that people read into art, but they don't necessarily see themselves as artists. And I love that. So this is at the Cleveland Art Museum. This is just some of the characters. And it's fascinating to start in a Catholic country because this idea of confessional has this different meaning. And so here's some of the probably more lighthearted ones that came through, but I love
The truth is not to be discovered because it was there before we were born. It hid itself when we were born, and it only comes out again once we are dead. I'm nearly dead, so the truth will shortly emerge.
I believe the truth is the struggle to find what it really is.
The truth is really small, it's very hard to see, but if you look really, really close, you will find the truth, and it's all around. Thank you.
It is true that I have got a girlfriend that is named Rian, and it is true that my favorite animal is a dolphin, okay? And that's all I wanted to say.
The truth is, Molly, you're a bitch.
The truth is that I want to be an actor, a dancer, a singer, but I'm not sure how to get into the business. I've joined Trading Places, and well, I've joined the agency of there, but I'm not sure if I'm going to get into I am in the agency, but I'm not sure if I'm going to get anything out of it. And I just really want to be an actress especially, or maybe a beautician, or a singer maybe, or maybe a dancer, but I'm not sure how to get in. That's the truth. This was an Accident Keen production. I want to say hello to Melody, because she's my little doggy, and all my other pets, and my parents. Peace out.
Unfortunately, the sound, the sync was off, but you get the picture. And so we've had 5,000 people participate in it, and it's just fascinating, really, just to see what people contribute. People talk about loss, they talk about divorce, they talk about these, there's these really profound moments. This is, I guess, maybe I just sent the wrong PowerPoint. This is from Afghanistan. This woman makes this testimony that I found so profound. Can we? So, I was gonna. I'm. Do
you want to play this?
I wanted to play it since we're.
Can we play this video?
Yeah. We'll skip it. And then I guess the last thing I'll show you. But basically, we're building this website, and it's just fascinating to see young women in Afghanistan speaking their truth, and it's humbling. But then the last thing I was going to show you is this video installation that we did at the Birmingham Museum, the Birmingham Airport, which is a 70-foot media wall where we took all this archival footage and videos from Alabama, which has all of this tension. It's a piece called The Long March at the Fred Shuttlesworth Airport. And basically all these footage kind of comes from left to right and feeds into this kaleidoscope. And it's really about this idea of the march towards the future, the march towards the present. And so we have images from the 19th century and from today, and they all feed in. And this is like this moment where we have on the right the march to integrate the school with Fred Shuttlesworth and his children, the Birmingham church bombings, and it was supposed to. There's a great moment that happens here, where there's the big three, MLK, Fred Shuttlesworth, and Ralph Abernathy, and as they feed into the kaleidoscope, there's this kind of really beautiful, meditative, almost like mandala moment. And because most of the images that we see of people in the public, or of celebrities and of models. I think it's so wonderful to be at this moment where we can put just sometimes everyday people, sometimes iconic historical figures, but to have them all on the same plane without their names, without my name, just kind of circulating into our subconscious, along with everyone else that we see. Are you ready?
I think they need to load.
You need to load it. So just watch this 1 second then, because I thought it was going to go in.
But I think they can't load it.
Okay.
I don't know. I'm not totally sure. I don't know.
You ready? I think we should move on. But go to Birmingham Airport. You got 45 minutes. Thank you.
I'm sorry I wasn't here.
No, it's...
We're good.
Come to the side.
What? Switch seats? Okay. Good. Thank you so much, Hank. So, there's some very interesting things that come out of that, and we can talk about some of these objects are monuments, and some of them are anti-monuments, and so we'll get back to that once Orly talks a little bit about her work. It's going to take them a few minutes, so if we want to talk, we can.
Okay.
Well, and both of you have started with sort of a gallery practice, and you've moved out into the public realm, and I'm wondering, what is it about that direct connection to the public that's been so compelling for you?
Well, since you've seen some of my work, for me, it is really about getting out of my comfort zone. And also collaboration is about that, that I can't, when I make work of my own full control and volition, sometimes I get stuck into the issues that I'm mostly invested in. But when I collaborate with people, and also when I make work for the public, it forces me to think with a broader kind of brush and make broader strokes, because I want people to engage who don't necessarily know or care about the same issues that I care about. And so I feel like there is a way to kind of talk about important things that I think are important, but also in a way that kind of invites people rather than just telling them exactly how they should respond to it.
But and you had talked about you don't particularly like to label your artwork because it's like setting the artwork aside. Somehow, the label at the Birmingham Museum of Art, it's like they put this tiny little label, but people are complaining it needs to be bigger. So what's the feedback loop? How do you actually get some feedback from the public? And this is ultimately one of the biggest issues about public art. There's no interpretation. There's no connection. It becomes just another piece of equipment in the environment, or it's infrastructure beautification. How do you get feedback from the public who's actually affected by your work?
Sometimes through protests, where I had to write an op-ed in the Birmingham newspaper that really, there was a moment where I was like, well, maybe I'm just wrong. But then also it allowed me to actually really think more powerfully about what was I really trying to say. So sometimes that way, but also there's vandalism is or I like to call beautification is another form of response, and also just having new opportunities. I think but the corporations don't normally ask my opinion when they put symbols out into the world that I consume and have to live with. And so similarly, I feel like, why can't I'm just trying to put my own 2 cents back into this discourse that I've been kind of hearing, since I was 2 years old, or reading, I should say. Because I do think of, visual culture as this language that we read as we sit in this room. There's signs and all of these different things. But we have now the chance to look at Orly.
Okay, hopefully this is going to work. Okay, so as we know, we are all influenced by where we come from. We're influenced with the way we think, the way we feel, the way we see, our sense of personal space and boundaries and even ownership. So I want to just begin by talking about where I'm from. I'm from New York City, which obviously looks nothing like this image. But I started off with it because it really is not that far off from the feeling that I had growing up in New York, which was surrounded by these things that were so much larger than life and obviously much larger than myself, these skyscrapers that felt endlessly tall and made me feel tiny, even smaller than I normally feel. So everything around me, similar to Chicago actually, everything around me felt big. So my inclination was to start small. And I started working with a knotting process that's essentially like crocheting. And it allowed me to make work quickly. And I relate these pieces to drawings because they're kind of gestural. They come out quickly. And I was able to do them, on my lap, in bed, in my small apartment. But most importantly, they allowed me to keep working with my hands, which for me is really a crucial element to my process. It's just continuing to toil, to move my hands. And we like to think that sometimes we like to think that we've evolved by a lot. And I think the truth is that we still have similar needs like we've always had. And I look back at some of these cave paintings, and there was this need, this desire to mark language, and in some cases actually they were functional. So in my own way, I sort of did the same thing in my modern day cave in my studio. Was a way to mark my own language at the time. But I was always drawn to the ground, to working from the ground up and having my pieces touch the ground. So the work started to literally touch the floor, and in some cases started to slouch down onto the ground. And I always had a sense that I wanted my work, if you will, I wanted it to be able to stand on its own 2 feet. In one form or another. But the problem with this kind of work was that it really wasn't doing what I wanted it to do. I wanted to create mass. And again, I was surrounded by these buildings and these massive forms around me. And I was affected by that. And I wanted to kind of, in a sense, compete with it. And these just weren't doing it. So my natural instinct, which looking back now at this image I've learned a lot from, but my natural instinct was to put myself into the work, to create a sort of natural armature. And it was a way to give it some form. And when I look back at this image now, I realize how much when we relate to everything around us, basically, anything three-dimensional, whether it's a tree, a building, a shoe, we have this, I think, instinctual nature to imagine what it would be like to be inside the object. That's how we understand things. That's how we understand the weight of something. That's how we try to understand how it's constructed. So similar to how a baby might just put something in their mouth to feel it, to taste it. We have this, I think, some sort of relationship to the three-dimensional objects where we kind of imagine our bodies inside of them. At the time, I thought my boyfriend at the time should have a similar realization. So during an opening of mine, I should mention he's now an ex-boyfriend, obviously. But he was a trooper, and I do appreciate it. He laid under one of my pieces for a duration of an opening. And I had this kind of push and pull between the feeling of being smothered by something that's larger than me, or giving it form from underneath. And I was kind of going in between the two. So actually, back to Socrates. My first opportunity to show outdoors was at Socrates Sculpture Park. And I wanted to create something vertical, as I had just recently mentioned. So I created this piece, which was sort of like a sleeve that went over a wooden pole. and the bottom still laid flat. And looking back now at this image, it's clearly very phallic. I can't remember if it was intentional or not, but let's say that it was, because you kind of can't ignore it. But this was also the first time that I actually saw the earth really interact with my work, and the force that it had with such ease. Within a few days, really, the earth was overtaking the piece, and any hole it could find, it seeped through it. And by the time we had to take down the piece, we were literally tugging at it to pull it out of its new natural environment. So while that was a little out of order, let me see. All right, we will make do. Hold on. Okay, well, we'll go here for now. While that was a humbling experience to see the earth interact, another exciting moment for me soon after was this piece in Riverside Park, made out of these collaged elements on top of these rocks. I sort of softened the area. And within minutes of installing it, there were people all over the piece. So now whether, the pull was coming from the ground, which was sucking the piece, or consumption was coming from above, from people overtaking the piece, there was this interesting moment where I realized that I could create spaces that could change the way people would normally use the location. So I started to look at images of instances where nature did this obviously in a natural way. And I created, this time in an indoor location in a gallery in New York, I created this cavernous space that clearly directed the way your body would move through the space, and now turning just to monochrome color because I wanted to focus much more on the form than on the flatness of the plane, which I was doing previously. So coming back to where I'm from, this sort of man-made jungle, I was inspired to make these stacks, these very geometrical, structural stacks for the Indianapolis Museum, which were in size quite heroic, and they were actually all titled after Mr. Universe champions. So one of them there is actually named Arnold, which at this point, at this year, seems like has a whole other meaning to it. But, okay, we're missing one. But anyways, so now I've gone through this stage of working with the material in an organic fashion, which I would say relates or is associated with a more feminine way of using the material, which usually flows and lies horizontally. And then there was, which we just saw, this kind of very vertical, muscular way of using the material. And I thought to myself, there's a moment in time where those two things meet, and the saying, we can't live with them, we can't live without them, I think goes for both men and women. And that one moment where they both need each other, I wanted to try to find that moment. So in this kind of performance, what I did was I created these structural stacks and just simply pushed them over and let them fall wherever they decided to fall into their organic shape. And interestingly, people found their way into the pieces, and they kind of created these natural benches. All right, I'm a little out of order, but it's fine. This is now, I'm fast forwarding basically to last summer, where a lot of these elements that I had been dealing with for the past 10 years really, I think, culminated into one project. This was in Madison Square Park last summer. an installation called Red, Yellow, and Blue, comprised of 3 different parts. One was red, another yellow, and another blue. The intention was to create spaces that people could choose to walk into. And this was, instead of dictating where people would go, I was giving them an option to enter or not to enter. And as opposed to previous work of mine, I wanted the walls to be non-threatening. So there's a very fine line between when a wall feels like it's suffocating you, and there's a point where it becomes like it feels like it's holding you. And I wanted it to do that. So that was the red one. This was the yellow one. Each one had its own character to it. And the blue one here, which was, I think, the most enclosed piece, but I don't think I have the image here, but it went all around this kind of green patch, but had this break in the middle, which was, I think, essential to the piece because it let it breathe. So people felt, even though they were inside, they could see outside. And one of the most exciting parts of working on this scale and working outside in the public is seeing the way people interact with the work, and is seeing how people choose what they choose to do. And in this case, these pieces did create rooms for people to walk into, to chill out in. And it was, and again, they found their nooks and crannies to sit in. And this was up for about 5 months. And I think here we have the final image, which was, New York City, you get all kinds of people and all kinds of reactions. This was an image that I found. There were, a lot of selfies and all kinds of fun images that were taken with these pieces. This is one of my personal favorites, just because I don't know what he was doing, but I found it to be very interesting that this man somehow inserted himself into the sculpture, I think, in quite a sculptural way. So. And what's funny about this last image is so that he's planking, right? So he's taking the physical body that's actually very fluid and natural, and he's finding something that's much more fluid and natural than his actual body is. So you start off with a picture of the mountains and of the caverns of the canyons of New York City, and it seems like you've been really reinscribing architecture throughout your work, Orly, it feels like. And yet you're using these very dynamic natural materials. How much were you influenced of the feminist artists of the 1960s, Harmony Hammond, artists like that who were, using, women's work, women's materials, but in very muscular ways? The truth is I was not at all influenced by those artists. In fact, I was influenced by the male artists of the 60s and the 70s and responding to their work. In school, we saw all these images of these cubes and monoliths and walls made out of steel, and they were all of them had, a lot of them looked alike. All of them took the hand out of the work. And what I was trying to do in a lot of these works was reinsert the hand and make it visible. Great. I want to ask the two of you to comment a little bit about something that we were talking about earlier, and then I'm going to open it up to the audience. Again, you were making a distinction between sculpture that's outside in a museum located sculpture park, probably with a cost to get in to see it, versus public art. And I want the two of you to talk a little bit about the distinction and whether one's better than another, and can the sculpture park be public art too?
When I think about public art, that's why with a lot of work, my work has the public in it. I don't know about the legal ramifications of that or that, but that's what I think about when I think about the public. The fact that there is this kind of lack of control. It's more democratized. There's a danger involved in it. Whereas sometimes when it's a sculpture park, there's a different, it's a safe space to express yourself, and it's sanctified for that. So I both of us, I guess, had our first opportunity at a sculpture park, but I'm also really excited about the fact that people are more embracing the need for us to see art outside of officially sanctioned places.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty fascinating. We're going through a period where it's public art is everywhere, and everyone's doing it. And I think that's because people are really finding actually value in having it in their daily lives, and it really has nothing to do with, quote unquote art. It just has to do with living and the experience of going through our lives and making it as good as it can be. But the distinction between showing at a let's say a park, a sculpture park, or a very urban environment, I think there is a strong one, because as I think Hank was pointing out, and again, it depends on the specifics. Socrates Sculpture Park is a different kind of place, but when you walk into a museum with a sculpture park, or some sculpture parks, you are walking into a place that is designated to see, where you're designated, and you're going to go see art, and you know that going into it, and that's fine. But it does, I think, take away some of the beauty that comes along with just coming across something in a location, like a lot of your work, Hank, that you wouldn't necessarily think you would find art.
Yeah, so really making it publicly accessible, whether it's ambiguous or not, is important. So questions from the audience? Go ahead. I think there's a microphone coming your way.
I have a question for Hank. I was just curious about the corporate response to some of his work. We heard him speak about the individual response to the work, but you're obviously interacting with some very powerful brands and companies in your conversation. And is this First Amendment stuff, or what happens?
Well, as Mitt Romney would say, corporations are people too. And they express themselves in any number of ways. But there's certain stuff that we all don't want to talk about. And in a certain way, a lot of the times the work that I put out there is stuff that those people don't want to talk about. So they'll let, and the more that they would engage in kind of, if they tried to stop me, so to speak, that would be a problem. But then it's at the Yerba Buena Center for the Arts, they asked me to take this MasterCard logo off of it or to alter it. And I said no, but they were like, if we get a cease and desist order, we're going to have to take it down. And then after it being up for 6 months and there being no real response, one of the art handlers at the museum, the preparators, said, of course we didn't get sued. How else were they going to get their logo on the front of a major downtown museum? So, sometimes silence is golden.
I think, if I may interject, that there's something about the self-censorship that we have been enacting in public art programs, a fear of offending people. But I think, again, getting back to plop art, I think the fear is now of boring people and not having it be meaningful to the way people live. So, other questions? So, here's a microphone.
The sculptures that are up in New York where do they go afterwards? Is this something that's permanent, or is this, because I've always wondered that when I walk past installations that are outside, what happens to these things later on? Where do they go, and do this kind of just disintegrate? What happens to this?
That's a good question, and it's a constant challenge. This particular installation, the red, yellow, and blue piece, moved to the De Cordova Museum and got reinstalled there in a new form specific to that site. From there, it's moving to another location. So
they keep moving. Yeah.
And some things go into storage, and some things are dismantled, and some things are thrown out. So it depends on really the resources of the artist or the institution, and then really the recyclability of the materials themselves. So I would say that maybe your rope, even if you were to leave it outside somewhere, it's going to last for quite a long time.
Yeah, I mean, and I'm working on a permanent piece right now. So I mean, it is material that could be permanent. Yeah.
And I think that's part of the flexibility of public art programs now, that when the drive was that this artwork must last forever, well, nothing lasts forever. And why you would put the burden on an artist to create a material that's kryptonite makes no sense. So I think that the power public art programs have now in museums is simply that if it's only up for 6 months, it's only going to offend people for 6 months, and then you've got an opportunity to engage people for 6 months. So I think that institutions have become much more nimble and elastic in responding to what it is that artists want to do. And I think the dematerialization of artworks is a really fantastic thing. You know, here we are in a fair where we're talking about the explosion of public sculpture, and yet in some ways the world is public sculpture. Every object, every building, every table, every pen is sculpture, and I think that artists are sort of grabbing all of that vocabulary for themselves. Yeah. Other questions? So go ahead.
I have a whole string of questions regarding that piece. I look at it and it's very time consuming, and it's got bulk because there's someone that's supported by it, and I'm wondering how it stands up, if the bulk is standing it up, and then I'm wondering if it's in layers or is it one piece. And I'd love to see your crochet needles.
Oh, I actually don't. So I forgot to mention, I don't use any hooks, or it's all by hand. Yeah. The pieces that are of bulk and height have pipes running through them. That the many layers. They're made of layers, so the layers are threaded over the pipes. So that gives it the structure. It's really similar to crocheting.
So, I'm sorry, if you come back up front. Yeah.
Hi, thank you. So I had a question for Hank. You mentioned a few things about interacting with the public and the imagery that was particular to the death of a family member and the elements of like corporate sponsorship, and the absolute ads, like those were powerful ads when they first came out. As a young student, my mother would yell at me, "You're not even 18. You're not going to have vodka ads in your room. I don't care how cool it is, or what have you, right?" And then to use the image with this image of like the slave patterns of bodies in the slave ships, and I'm wondering, you kind of alluded to the fact that there are like these communities that may be unaware or underexposed. But do you have a sense of how those communities might respond to that work, or are like? What do you mean by communities that are unaware? Well, I'm saying like
I think everyone's aware.
Well, no, I'm not saying that there's a lack of awareness. I'm saying that there's like a different interpretation. Like maybe like I'm a professor at Malcolm X. When I take my students downtown, I have to force them. I have to like tell them how to get to the Art Institute or Millennium Park, and then they see these images and they don't think it's for them, they don't understand, and then something turns on and they have a deeper connection to it because it's outside of their day-to-day, or they're working, they're doing their thing, they're not as consciously aware of it. And I'm wondering in some of the, like in Alabama or some of the places where where you've had these public pieces, what is, like, your interaction with the public outside of maybe those people who are art goers? Are you aware of that, or what's the language to that?
I think that has everything to do with placement. You mean my personal interaction with it, or because there's various ways of public engagement. So some people call it what street art or graffiti has become kind of really well known, and it's really about kind of this defiance of kind of the system. And I'm really interested in using the system as a way to communicate to the masses.
Right.
And because I do believe advertising is one of those few languages that everybody does ever understand. Everyone does have something to say about it. That's why I like to use that, because you don't have to have a PhD or MFA to be able to say, I like that, I don't like that, oh, they're doing something different with this, or I have a problem with that. And that the fact that you can make art that some people can engage with, who are very learned, and people who in discourse, and people who are just going on their way to work, and I love the fact that my work can speak to both. Sometimes people have given a critique that that the work is a one-liner. But I like to say, I like to make what I call like a 1.5 liner, where it says something and it starts to say something else, and that's where it gets muddy, and really, and that muddiness is, I think, what keeps work potent for years and hopefully decades.
Okay, thank you. I asked my question poorly, but that's the perfect answer to what I meant.
Hank, where would be the perfect, where would you like to, more than any place else on earth, in America, like to have your images shown?
I'm not that much of an egotist. What I'm really interested in, again, is having us, as if the 100 or 60, however many people here, all made work for the public and put it out, and we took over all the billboards in Chicago, that's what I would love, for a week, a month. That would be really exciting, because I learn as much from what other people have to say as I do from what I have to say. So, yeah.
So, go ahead.
I actually got the mic in my hand, so I got a question for Hank. My question was, when you're creating these works for public and everything, do you ever think about the audience who are going to see them? Is it, when you're doing photography or whatever, do you say, okay, this is going to hit this particular audience in a different way than it will hit someone else? And how do you feel when you're doing that? Or is it something purposely done that this is going to be at this particular place that you do this type of work? Or is it something you say, okay, this is just in me and I need to get it out?
I think that's something I think I'm working more towards. I'm recognizing the way that I'd like to use these corporate models of engaging with communities, like with focus groups and all this stuff. However, inherently, as an artist, I have a problem with predicting what the audience. If I already know how you're going to respond to what I put out, why make it? And so, but what I do think, I got to always acknowledge Dawood Bey, who is, one of the most incredible, prolific photographers there is. And my problem really is and he's known my mom my entire life, right? So my problem is when I make stuff, I know that my mom's friends are going to be there. Like, you know what your son did? So there's so in a way, there's the way the audience, the public at large, but also recognize that I'm kind of part of a legacy of people dealing with photography in their own communities and sometimes in different communities, and how what I say reflects on not just what I want to say, but on a whole host of other people.
So can we get the microphone back here to this gentleman? And maybe we'll just take one or two more questions. Thanks.
I'd just like to make more of a comment on what Hank is doing. I see it as being really brave and putting yourself out there, especially when you have something so close to your cousin's funeral. And every time I see it, it always brings tears to my eyes. And that's the thing about art, I think most of the art sometimes you don't evoke that that sense of bringing something out of it, and I really appreciate it for that you're taking risks and being brave to do that. We forget that as artists, and I think it's really important to make sure that the students that we're teaching or the artists that are making art really put that out every day and all the time you do it. So thanks for doing that.
Thank you. One last question over here. Yeah.
My question is for Hank, and I want to ask, what made you travel from the very, very beginning, like outside of the U.S.?
Travel?
Mm-hmm.
What made? It never occurred to me that I shouldn't.
I said, what made you?
Yeah, it never occurred to me that I shouldn't. Really, my cousin who was murdered, his mother went to Kenya when she was 16 and came back pregnant. And so I had, my father lived. He was drafted into Vietnam and then lived in France and Germany and Denmark. And so I just, I've never. I'm more afraid to travel than I am. Like when I felt like it was a responsibility it felt like a natural thing I had to do, like a rite of passage, more than it was something I wanted to do. Because for me, the comfort zone, the things I know, like we were both New Yorkers, and for New York, we're talking about how it is to, like, even for us to go to Brooklyn, it's a thing, psychologically. And because when you grow up in New York, you feel like you're in the center of the world. And the thing that I've gotten to appreciate as I've traveled all over the world is to recognize how small my world is. And so when I get to do things with people in Afghanistan or in Angola or in Vietnam, where I have work up right now, or in Peru, it's just like all of a sudden my world becomes bigger and smaller simultaneously. And so I don't know if that answers your question, but
yeah.
Okay, well, thank you.
Well, I want to thank you so much, Orly and Hank, for being here. It's been just wonderful to hear you talk and see most of your images in any case. And thank you, everybody, for being here. And you know what they look like. So,
Thank you.